little bit. Tell me about the funds that we were entitled to from the federal government that we didn't get.
The federal government was offering education funds to different states, and you had to apply for them. The Christie administration applied for the funds, but we were denied the $400 million due to a very technical error, a very small omission on the application. And at the time, Brett Schundler was the education commissioner, and he was honest about it. He said he started talking about what had happened. And he had worked long and hard with the NJEA to come to a compromise solution. They came together, they had meetings, and they finally agreed on what should be in the application. They disagreed on a lot, but they ended up agreeing on basically 99%, in his words, 99% of the application. They submitted the application, they were about to submit the application, they had an agreement, and what happened is they did a release, a news release, and the next morning, Jim Gerhardt, this is not Barbara Buono, this is Brett Schundler speaking, Jim Gerhardt on 101.5 Talk Radio went after the governor, criticizing him for capitulating to the teachers union because they had a meeting of the minds that was capitulating. And according to Brett Schundler, the governor said that is intolerable to make it appear as though I have this agreement, this deal with the NJA, and he ordered them to redo the application. They had to do it very quickly. They had a very short window of opportunity. They had to redo it over the weekend, and they made some errors apparently. And so, as the chairperson of the Senate Legislative Oversight Committee, I wanted to have a hearing on it to see that that's what the role of the committee is, to investigate the workings of government. And at the time, I started to rely on Oprah. And that's when I realized that Oprah was a paper tiger, because the Christie administration, we wanted emails, we wanted information, and they, first of all, they took their good time in responding to us. And when they did, they essentially, would use blanket excuses like deliberative. That's what there's this broad exception. Deliberative. If it's government deliberative, it's part of the deliberative process, which wasn't defined.
You couldn't have
Exactly. So we got very little. So I said I was going to subpoena Brett Schundler to the committee, and I remember he called my office. It was before I said I would subpoena him. Now this is like a few years ago, so it was actually 3 years ago, and I announced that I was going to have a legislative oversight hearing. And at that time was when I started Oprah thing. That's the sequence of events. Brett Schundler, at the time, he was fired because he spoke the truth, called my office, my Senate office, and said, I'd be willing to come and testify, but you have to subpoena me. And so I said, okay. And like any good trial lawyer, which I used to practice law, I asked him to come into my office to have a discussion and to see what he was going to say. And when he came into my office, he dropped such a bomb. I was blown away. When he told me what actually happened, that the governor said to him that he could not tolerate the perception that he had reached a compromise with the NJEA. And as a result, he essentially bungled the application process. Yeah. And we lost $400 million. And as a result, Brett Schundler, who I actually spoke on the Senate floor when he was, the Senate, he has Senate confirmation, all of the cabinet members. And even though we disagreed on a lot of education issues in terms of policy, I knew him even at the time when he was sworn into office to be a man of integrity and honesty and having the best interests of the children at heart. And he certainly showed that that was true during this whole process.
Was this the first time that you began to use your political muscle in the legislature?
Oh, no.
Okay. You have been at it a while.
Yeah. Legislatively, as well as just as a senator and also as the chair of the budget committee, with respect to some reforms I was trying to push through. But one of the things that comes to mind is there was a piece of legislation when Bernie Kenny, Senator Kenny, was the majority leader. He was the prime sponsor. I was the co-prime. There's two prime sponsors on legislation. I was the second lead prime on the controller legislation. And what it was intended to do was to create a chief fiscal watchdog for the state of New Jersey to oversee contracts. Now we know that contracts, there's gross abuse in contracting in the state of New Jersey and in municipalities and in school districts. So this comptroller was intended to be the chief fiscal officer that would review contracts to see if in fact it made sense, to see if there was mismanagement, to see if there was fraud. And I remember that certain senators went in to see Governor Corzine, and they kept amending the bill and weakening it and finally when they won there was a breaking point. I think it was when they said that the comptroller would only be able to review contracts over $10 million. Now, most of a lot of the damage, a lot of the the real problem and abuse is under $10 million contracts. So I will never forget this day, and I stood up on the floor of the Senate when the bill came up for a vote. And I remember Tom Moran did a column on it, and I remember he said she rose slowly. He was very dramatic about it. And and I said I rose with a heavy heart because I not only took my name off as the co-prime sponsor, but I voted against the bill.
Wow.
And I just, nobody's...
And that's what happens to bills. They keep getting amended and amended and amended until they don't resemble what you started out with.
And that's exactly why I had to take a stand, because to me it was worse acting as if there was reform when in fact there wasn't. And in many ways I felt that it made the situation worse. Mm-hmm. So, because we had another officer, the Inspector General at the time, Governor Cody, when he was governor, I believe it was his legislation, created an Inspector General, and this legislation really took away a lot of the powers of the Inspector General. And I thought that it was much more, the Inspector General had much more robust investigative powers, and I thought that this legislation actually undermined that. So made the situation...
Which would be serious, because in the military, the Inspector General is a force to be reckoned with.
And Mary Jane Cooper was the first and only Inspector General. She was amazing. She actually went to law school with her.
So what happened to that legislation? Why don't we have an Inspector General now?
Well, the comptroller legislation passed. Matt Boxer, to his credit, is doing the best he can in an office that is, is somewhat limited. It's strapped for
staff.
For staff, and also it doesn't have the kind of powers that the broad powers that I think it would really need to make a difference. In New Jersey, we have, as a budget chair for years, I would pinpoint the contracting procedures. We have all these contracts for goods and services, professional services, and we know we have an auditor. The state of legislature has an auditor, and they used to do oversight of these contracts. They, randomly, they would pick out certain contracts, and you saw just from the contracts that they audited that there were some serious problems. And the problem is that there's no oversight of these contracts. Once the contract is entered into, there's the Division of Purchase and Property and Treasury. They will designate a contract manager, but they don't really manage the contract. It's on its own. So you don't know if they're abiding by the terms of the contract, if it's even needed.
That's a curious thing. Let me ask you about the Birdsall pay-to-play. Mm-hmm. In theory, we have legislation against pay-to-play, and yet Birdsall, number one, gave to both parties, all candidates. He was an equal opportunity lender, so to speak. But the fact is, we have legislation on pay-to-play, and how come it doesn't kick in? And how sad that a significant business knows that if he wants business throughout the state, he has to do this. He has to invest, so to speak. I was unhappy recently when I saw that the Birdsall firm had to be sold. The employees lost jobs, lost pay in the interim period, and the people who got the funds were absolved.
The candidates, you mean?
candidates on both sides.
Right.
And so I sent an email to the Asbury Park Press, and I said, if the people taking the funds knew they were going to be exposed in the same manner as Mr. Birdsall in giving the funds, the practice would end fast. But it also said that the law mustn't be sufficient.
No, I think the law is being enforced. I think that's a good thing.
Enforced.
Yeah, I think it's
Who does the enforcing?
the legal authorities, the prosecutor.
Attorney General?
Attorney, depends, the prosecutor, there could be the county prosecutor,
County
it could be
prosecutors.
the attorney general. No, I think that that it's bad news that the practice is ongoing, but it's good news that the people are being prosecuted and, receiving the full force of the law as intended.
It would seem to me that whether you took it, various of our politicians in township committeemen and so forth in Monmouth County said, we didn't know it's hands off, our people collect that money, we don't know anything about it, and it's common practice. But Birdsall had to set up a system in which his employees made the donation, so it was purposefully obscuring the source and who was getting it. And
Exactly.
so,
That's the criminal act.
it's a criminal act, but it goes back to what you say, no enforcement. I don't know who blew the whistle on Birdsall. Must have been the county prosecutor.
I don't remember that, I don't know.
Okay.
Or maybe the attorney general.
I want to talk about, I asked several colleagues, what do you want me to ask Barbara today? And
Who are those colleagues?
I have a friend in Colts Neck who reads every newspaper that relates to finance. And so he tries to give me a primer and my head is spinning. But he said, ask Barbara what she's going to do about property taxes.
Okay, great.
Because people who have been at risk in these past 5 years, their domicile is on the line if they can't pay the taxes. But then that assumes that you're going to put it on a broader base, which is the income tax. And are you ready to take that position?
Well, this is what I think. I think that, there's two aspects to it, immediate relief and reform. And, what I wouldn't do is I wouldn't have slashed property tax rebates like this governor did. You may recall in 2009, candidate Christie promised he wouldn't slash property tax rebates, which are now credits, but he did. And it caused property taxes to rise on average of almost 20%. And not only that, but he actually tried to cover it up. I don't know if you remember in this last budget, he said he was delaying over $400 million in property tax relief. Well, that's not true. He skipped a year. And you don't see two property tax rebate
No, that's right.
in the current budget. So he also tried to cover it up. But so I would, I think that we need to give people immediate relief.
Does
Number
that mean a rebate?
a credit. Yeah,
Or a
I think,
credit?
yes, absolutely. I think people need that relief now. But in terms of reform, long-term reform, it's a complex problem. We would have had if there was a silver bullet, we would have had it already. But during we had a joint legislative session of the legislature a number of years back over the summer and to deal with the issues of property tax relief. And out of that joint legislative hearing came the School Funding Reform Act, which I authored in the Senate. And that's one of my proudest accomplishments because it does a few things. First thing it does, and we know that the greatest driver of property taxes is funding for our public schools. If we have less state funding going toward that, by definition, property taxes will rise. What this school funding formula did is for the first time really in 30 years, and the Supreme Court validated it as constitutional, is it started to send available state funding, it started to distribute that funding in a more fair, equitable, and predictable way to all of the children, regardless of where they live. So every child in New Jersey should be able to get the kind of education, the resources to have a quality education. I mean, that's very near and dear to me because, if I didn't have a quality education in the town that I grew up in, Essex County, I would not be sitting here running for governor of the state of New Jersey. But the second point to your specific question on property taxes is that if this funding formula, and it was only in effect 1 year, and then this governor came into office and dismantled it. If it had been allowed to be phased in over the 10 years as it was planned, it would have begun to tap down property taxes. And so that's and there has to be a multifaceted approach. We have, as you know, a multiplicity of municipalities. We were just talking about the fire districts. We know that there's the administrative costs associated with each one of those, layers upon layers upon layers of bureaucracy. What I would like to see, I mean, just look to Princeton Borough and Princeton Township as an example. I would like the state to help facilitate, to give municipalities the tools, the information that they need to make an informed, for their residents to make an informed decision whether or not the municipalities can share services, can consolidate, and that's what Princeton did, and that's why I hold them up as an example. They tried for years to consolidate. You may
So they
recall.
consolidated Princeton Borough?
And Princeton Township. Princeton Borough is the hole in the middle of the donut, so to speak.
Right.
And what they found, they actually they gradually started to share services. They had one school district, for example, and then eventually they invested funds, and they did a report that did a cost-benefit analysis so that the residents had all the information to make an informed decision. What were the costs associated? What were the savings? What were the benefits? What were the detriments? And that gave the people in the borough and the township the information they needed to go to the
Assurance that
ballot.
they were on the right track.
And you know what? Not everybody was in favor of it at the end of the day. I've been to Princeton, and I know there are people that still are. I think if people understand that you're not going to lose your identity, honestly, I lived in Princeton for a little while after law school, and for about a year and a half. And when people asked me if I lived in the borough or the township, I said I didn't know. And then I would tell people that it was on Jefferson Road, and they said, "Oh, well, Jefferson
Your
Road,
township.
it goes in both. It goes across the borough and the township." So they said it highlighted and underscored how you really get caught up in this distinction, and obviously you want to preserve your town's identity, but people
But there's
need to
real
have
resistance in New Jersey to consolidate.
home rule, it's called, right?
For example, in Colts Neck, one of the areas we could have consolidated was our court with Tinton Falls, because the same attorneys and judges were in both places, but it didn't happen. And so we continue to pay whatever our costs are. One of the things that
Well, then the democratic process should kick in, right?
really hard to bring democratic process in certain places in Monmouth County.
Well, I actually did support legislation that would impact on that. That if there was a LUARC, there was a commission at the state level that if they do recommendations, studies of areas where services should be shared, and that should persuade towns in a way to do it by linking it to state aid.
One of the situations I find is resistance to what is obvious. In Colts
To
Neck.
you, maybe.
In Colts Neck, we have 3 schools. But
Three schools?
Three schools.
What, are they K through 12, all three?
Elementary, primary, and 6th through 8th.
When you say primary, you mean?
Kindergarten through first, probably, second and third. However, our school population is dropping. And another of my gurus who tracks trends says this is a national trend. We are declining in student population. In Colts Neck, what it's accomplished is that we are paying $19,000 per pupil. The obvious is that we should, number one, either close the school or a reduction in force. And for the most part, school board and administration are resistant to any change.
Is it an elected board? Or
Yes.
appointed, okay.
And so, but this is a national problem. And Linda and I were discussing it. She lives in a school district that has, I think, 17 schools.
I'm not sure the total.
But at any rate, the economic thing to do to hold the line on school costs is to consolidate the neighborhood school, or close some of the schools. But there's great resistance to doing that. I have a friend who has property in North Carolina. There is one superintendent for the whole county. We have 52. And so with salaries of 200,000, I think we put out 5 million a year just for those positions. I don't see any incentive for school districts to consolidate. Are there?
Well, as you say, if it's cost save, it's just a matter of a comfort level with the status quo, is what you're suggesting in Colts Neck?
Yes.
Well, I think, again, similarly to what I just suggested with respect to municipalities, I think that people need to know. I mean, people aren't satisfied with their property taxes increasing.
Right.
So I think if that linkage is made and people, and I think a similar approach could be used as I suggested for municipalities. Have a study, have the Board of Education, elect people to the Board of Ed that will conduct a study and evaluate what would happen, what would be the best way. I think it would be an eye-opener for people if they saw what the cost savings would be. And that education would not be impacted.
We seem to be focused on education, and that's good because I have background there. But we're talking about the larger picture. For example, if a school district closes a school, and you save on the janitorial, you save on administration, you save on teachers, that school cannot be used for other than a school purpose. You can't rent it out to Merck or things like that.
I just want to get a drink of water.
And so, I think that that's a resistant problem. That's one of the areas of taxation that we just don't seem to be getting control of. But I want to talk about
Why
something.
not sell the school? Why not sell the property? We had what was called the Old Franklin School in Metuchen for a while, and it was an albatross. We couldn't collect any revenue, tax revenue, obviously, because it was owned by the school system. And eventually, it was, oh my goodness, election after election. Thank you very much. Excuse me. It was a bone of contention, and I have to be honest with you. I was on the council then, and I had ideas, and the ideas that I had weren't implemented. They ended up building a lot of housing, multiple townhouses there, and it took up the only green space we had left in town. Now, I would have liked to have seen it kept as more of a green area, but we did address it. So what, they can sell the property?
So they can sell.
Oh yeah,
Okay.
oh yeah.
I want to talk about again the property taxes and the report that came in from the head of the League of Municipalities wants a discussion, at least, on moving taxation from property tax, and the only one left then is income tax. And Christie attacks.
Well, that's his MO.
It is.
I think the fact that they actually did a report coming up with another option, that's what you want, that you want to have a discussion. You have to get together and come up with other options and other solutions to long-term reform, which is what we were talking about. That this governor shut down the process is just an abdication of responsibility on one of the most pressing issues, other than jobs in the economy. Property taxes are the most pressing issue, and as you know, not just for seniors, but also, my daughter and her husband moved out of New Jersey to North Carolina because they couldn't afford it. They couldn't afford, they had a rental unit here in Metuchen, and they're actually in North Carolina now with paying less and getting a lot more.
I have a house in North Carolina, $700 a year taxes.
Where in North Carolina?
Morehead City. And I said to my next door neighbor, who she and her husband were in education, and I said, we're spending $19,000 per pupil in my town. She said, we're spending $6,000. And that's why. but it will, the economy has probably accelerated the outward migration. Because how can young people,
Well, in terms of the jobs, it's true. Our unemployment rate is the highest in the region, as you know, and our job growth is one of the lowest. It's number 43 in terms of job creation. It's just, and this is a governor whose only economic plan has been to offer $2.1 billion in tax credits to big corporations, and where has that landed us?
down in Atlantic City.
Exactly. Well, we just read about Rebel today, yeah.
And, I counted on my fingers yesterday, because I run a small business, and,
What's small?
and
Oh,
my publications.
Oh, okay.
I've been publishing for 40 years.
Wow.
And I've gone from the time when I had 2 locations and many employees to a skeleton crew that, me and one
And I
other.
think that's terrible for
And,
democracy,
and,
by
and
the
when
way.
I
It's
counted
terrible.
on my fingers, because when the recession hit at the end of 2007, the beginning of 2008, first I thought it was my fault. And then I realized how universal it was. But it's been almost 6 years when I counted on my fingers and I said 2008 to 2013, I said, wait a minute, I thought we were supposed to be over this 2 years ago.
You're talking about the recession.
The recession.
Well, we have lagged, New Jersey has lagged the nation in terms of digging our way out of the recession. New York, for example, not only regained all of the jobs they lost during the recession, but had a net increase. New Jersey barely restored a half of those jobs that were lost, and it's a failure in leadership.
Governor Buono has taken a very active interest in developing the northern part of the state. What have we done in New Jersey, or what can we do?
Well, earlier last week, I don't know if you're familiar with my economic and jobs creation plan. We should give you, do you have a copy of it? 'Cause
No.
we can-
I'll make sure you get a copy.
Got it, thank you.
Well, as I said, this is the governor, unfortunately.
This is job creation we're talking about.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
What did you think it was?
No, I just wanted to clarify it and
Oh,
get my head with
no.
you.
We need to stick with what works. What we know that what works in New Jersey is that we have a skilled workforce, our location. This governor's plan, as I said, is a singular plan for economic growth has been to give tax credits out to big corporations.
And that's my money. When you give tax credits, that's yours
And
and
if we
my
have
money.
time at the end, I want to talk about a tax expenditure budget, because I have legislation that Corzine actually signed into law, one of his last pieces of legislation, that would require at the same time the governor issues his budget address, has to issue a tax expenditure budget, which is all of the tax credits and deductions that are embedded into the tax code. And with a budget.
So it has to be part of the budget.
It's
so
a
that you
separate
get
document.
a true picture.
Yes, it's online, because as you know, like you said, it's your money, it's tax revenue that's not coming into the state.
That I have to cover.
Exactly. So anyway, we could talk about that, but what my plan does is it focuses on growing the middle class, creating a more robust, healthy middle class, what this governor has turned his back on. What it does, it talks about, it's 5 planks. It talks about investing in our current workforce by retraining them and giving them the skills they need to get those new jobs that are in demand. It talks about investing in our the workforce of tomorrow, and that's our kids in schools. We have to change the curriculum in K through 12. There's going to be nearly 300,000 new jobs created by 2018 in the STEM field, science, technology, engineering, and math. And our kids, the curriculum does not reflect that in our schools K through 12. We also need to ensure that, I was lucky. I put myself through college and law school here in New Jersey, but back then it was affordable. Tuitions, as you know, have far outpaced salaries, and wages have stagnated, if not decreased. And so this would also invest, that somewhere along the way the state of New Jersey decided that higher education wasn't as important as it really is an engine for economic growth. So this would focus on investing in particularly our public institutions of higher learning, giving them the resources they need to train our kids for the jobs that are in demand, and doing something about reining in tuition. The second piece of the plan is giving our families the supports that they need to be able to raise a family and stay in New Jersey, and that would increase the minimum. As you know, it's on a ballot question on November 5th, remember, a ballot initiative that would increase the minimum wage, tying it to a cost of living. This governor vetoed that. Even though he vetoed it, at the same time, he's increasing all these, tax credits for corporations that we know have not delivered the quality and quantity of jobs that were promised, right?
Mm-hmm.
We also need to, can I talk a little bit? Do we have?
We have a few more minutes.
All right, I'll try. I won't talk too long. But I need to talk, this is a really important piece of it. We have been losing good paying jobs in New Jersey for years to other states, and not just low tax states. I'm talking about California, New York, and Massachusetts, and what these states have. We used to be called the medicine capital of the nation. We no longer can call ourselves that. We have been losing what those states have in common is strong research partnerships between academia and the emerging markets. And I'm not just talking about pharmaceutical, I'm talking about biotech, I'm talking about renewable energy. We just lost Roche. I grew up in Nutley. That's where I learned to drive my car, in Hoffman LaRoche's parking lot. And we just lost them to California, not exactly a low tax haven.
No.
And so I had a piece of legislation in that the governor vetoed it and had some very derogatory things to say about it. And it would have vested the EDA, the Economic Development Authority that we have in New Jersey, with the authority to facilitate these partnerships. It would have created a web portal to have a clearinghouse so that we partnered our research opportunities in universities with the emerging markets, and it would have been a win-win. It would have drawn them to New Jersey with the promise of a ready-made workforce and research opportunities. And then it would have, I've got 6 kids, and all I can tell you is I think they need more training, more education, more different skills to be able to compete in the global marketplace. And this governor denigrated and dismissed, ridiculed the bill.
You'd have been proud of me at a freeholders meeting a month or so ago, in which I got up. I hadn't intended to speak about vocational education in Monmouth County. Essex County has, not Essex, Middlesex County has 14 vocational high schools. I believe that vocational education is going to be required to nursing homes, hospitals. They are going to need not just doctors and nurses, they're going to need cadres.
That's another piece of my plan. I totally agree with you. We have to focus more on county colleges and vocational schools as affordable training opportunities and retrain, right? I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be in college. There's hundreds of professions that don't need a post-secondary education.
Right now, I think Brookdale is filling that gap, but that's not the true function of Brookdale. The vocational high schools within Monmouth County should be doing the job. And I challenged...
Well, when I was in high school, do you remember, when I was in high school, we used to have kids that would actually leave during the day and have a work study. They would have some courses at the VOTAC, is it called back then?
They do that in Monmouth.
Oh, they do?
But it's not efficient because somebody is going to have to get on a school bus, sit in an office, wait for the bus to come, and lose educational time. And so we have a new head of vocational education in Monmouth County, and I think he has a better vision. But now I'm going to redirect you.
I'm sorry, we only have time for a couple more questions.
Okay.
I didn't finish about my economic plan, so if you read it and have questions, you should call me because there's a lot more to it. Yeah.
One of the things that I attended last month was a meeting in Homedale. Mr. Zucker, Ralph Zucker, who owns the Lucent Alcatel building, was there to, he first came to town 6 years ago, and now it was being reapproached. He owns the building, and he wants a mixed use, which will include a college, hospital type of things, mall, maybe some residences, but a mixed use for that building in order to save the historical building. But in order to do that, he had to bring in Toll Brothers, who want to address the 55 active adult
55 and over.
market.
Mhm.
But they're talking about units that cost between $500,000 and $700,000 and are palatial. I read in the past, I think it may be in this League of Municipalities issue, that there has to be a reuse of the empty office buildings throughout New Jersey. In Monmouth County, a while ago, it was 11% vacant buildings.
We really overbuilt them, yeah.
And I think throughout the state, you have that issue. I saw that part of your background, or where, not your background, but support that you got from, financial support that you've gotten, is from companies that are faced with this problem. They have two choices. They either can demolish perfectly good buildings, or they have to come up with a reuse.
And I'm sure they go in for tax appeals. I know that that's been a huge issue in my legislative district alone. In Edison, mostly a lot of the commercial owners have come into the town for, tax appeals, and they're winning them.
And so communities are having to work
Exactly.
with less money.
Exactly.
And that's going to become even more critical in this next budget round. And so is that something that you support? Do you see that as viable? Reuse? The other thing they found
Absolutely,
is...
yeah. Well, I know that rental properties, residential rent, that's the only market I find it very interesting, the real estate market, quite frankly, and what the trends are and how it's changed, and how the trend has really, it's changed from large, which is why I'm surprised to hear you say that about the larger palatial, because if anything, people in my age group are moving more, exactly, and toward the cities, and in rental properties. There's a movement toward rental properties, so I think the market will force that to happen, and if not, I think, and again, I always draw from my time as a councilwoman in Metuchen. I used to serve on the planning board, and I think that every 10 years a municipality has to have a new master plan, and so I would assume that for the towns that have this problem involved, that it will be reflected in their master plan in terms of the different sort of uses that would be permissible, because it would have to be residential as opposed to commercial. And then there's the arguments again, there's towns that don't like residential, but then again, it depends on the kind of residential, the size of the units.
Well, I think your Jersey cities and your, what's the other Hudson County city that's on the shore? Hoboken is reflecting what this magazine said about the young people. They don't want that suburban isolation, but it's driven by things like how much does gas cost? How early do you have to get on the road in the morning to get to work? And so,
which brings us to the ARC tunnel.
Right, okay.
That's another thing that I would do as governor.
You would reinstate the tunnel?
I absolutely would. I still lose sleep over that. I have to tell you the truth. We need to work with the federal government and draw down as many federal dollars as we can. We also have to get creative in terms of how we fund our infrastructure rebuilding, because it's been neglected for so many years. And our bridges and roads received a D. They had a rating that just recently was a D. And some of those bridges, I tell I shudder when I hear my kids going over them. So we really need to do something about it. This is a governor that rejected $3 billion in federal funding for the ARC Tunnel. And, we would have been a cost-sharing arrangement, but it was in place for a long time. He decided unilaterally, even though Ray LaHood, the Transportation Secretary, came to New Jersey several times to try and
work with you.
And he was adamant. And I believe that this is just one of the examples where this is a governor who doesn't plan for the future of New Jersey, he just plans for his political future. And that's what that decision is reflective of. The National Conservative Republican Party is against any large infrastructure programs. This would have benefited, not, as you alluded to, the traffic situation in New Jersey would have taken more cars off the road, put people on trains into the city, would have created more job opportunities for people in New Jersey. Obviously, we're not creating them here in New Jersey. And it would have enhanced property values on this side of the river. Not only would it have created those construction jobs, but thousands and thousands of jobs in the aftermath of that tunnel. And we need to revisit that.
That's
and
interesting.
fast.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Sam Barney's going to that.
Yes, I only had, this was the fun part of my day. I'm like,
Thank you very much.
We've learned a lot, so.
well, thank you for coming.
And